Imagine if we could walk in the shoes of relatives who were alive decades ago or even centuries.
We can't travel back in time, but there is a way to venture into their experiences without being a history buff. 9 News reporter Jennifer Moore is on your side with how you can learn a lot about yourself while looking at the past.
Oh, shoot, that's your what, grandmother?
My great-grandmother.
That's your great-grandmother, right.
3-year-old Anaya Jordan knows about her living relatives, and her grandfather hopes that when she's older, she'll be able to know about as many of her ancestors as possible.
In terms of great-great-grandparents, I wasn't aware of any of them 2 years ago. Wasn't aware of any of them. But I've since, in the last 2 years, identified, say, it's out of the 16, positively 12 I've identified concretely.
Jordan is undertaking the task of genealogy, learning about his family history by researching his ancestry.
You don't think it's important. You know, when you're younger, you think everybody's going to be around. You don't think they ask questions. And then, you start hitting 40, and a lot of your colleagues are dying, and your family members are starting to leave the scene, and you're kind of like, hey, where did I come from? Who am I?
Jordan says he started his research by simply interviewing relatives at holiday events and family functions. Then he brought his research here to the 3rd floor of the Hamilton County Public Library downtown.
You always start with yourself or your child if you want to do both sides of the family and work back.
Patricia Van Skyke is the manager of the Genealogy and Local History Department, which is one of the top genealogy collections in the country.
We have over 100,000 rolls of microfilm. We have digital records. We have over 100,000 books covering all 50 states. Very strong in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi materials. The people that have migrated from the South, especially African Americans, to this area.
Microfilm is basically a picture of an original record, such as birth and death certificates, that you can find online or at the library, and you can even purchase. That's where a lot of genealogists find information. With February being Black History Month, the library is offering several programs targeting African American genealogy, which gets complicated due to slavery.
Again, for us, it's difficult because once you get past 1870, we're not on a census record. We're probably someone's property. And I've got some strong leads on who actually have owned some of my ancestors.
That was the case with John Bryant, who began his research 35 years ago, before websites like ancestry.com even existed. His research led him to Alabama, where he met a woman with strong connections to his family's past.
She's the great-granddaughter of Stokely D. Massengill. Stokely D. Massengill was the slave holder that had my great-grandfather, Green Massengill, as one of his slaves.
Like many African Americans, they'll find ancestors listed as mulatto in census records. The word was used to identify people of both black and white race, many times the slave master being the father, even though it was not documented. But Bryant warns to not expect everything to be accurate, as was the case with the family surname he found.
Coming out of slavery, for one thing, the slaves were oftentimes not literate, and sometimes the census taker was not all that literate, and so they spelled the name as it sounded or appeared, so you have to be careful in doing the research.
My mother has done a lot of research on our family history as well, and she's utilized all of her resources, such as finding letters from family members that date back to decades ago, or even looking at obituaries for information. Consider also looking at newspapers where you might find random photos or even mentions of relatives. And like many, we also found that we have Native American ancestry connected to Cherokee and Choctaw tribes, with one of my great-great-grandmothers even growing up on a reservation. So why is this all important? Well, it's like the saying, you don't know where you're going unless you know where you came from, and that includes your ancestry.
I really think people get a huge sense of who they are, understanding where they've come from. And, sometimes people say, well, I don't want to do my genealogy because I might find something that's a little bit unsettling. I might find out something traumatic that happened to an ancestor. But we find that genealogists that discover those things, that actually gives them inspiration and hope. They're like, my ancestors had all of this to deal with, and they made it. They survived. I'm here today to tell the story.
Bryant now knows of 400 living relatives due to his research and has no plans of stopping anytime soon. Neither does Jordan, who has traveled to meet distant cousins in West Virginia and Mississippi and learned about illnesses that run in his family as well as a family cemetery. He says don't let age limit you if you're considering genealogy.
But anybody's capable of doing genealogy, young or old. It does not an issue of when you get started. Just get started.
So if you're interested, get started now. No matter what your background, the resources are out there. Of course, there's the library, but there's also the Family History Center operated by the Mormon Church, which you can utilize for free at several locations, including the Freedom Center. Or simply go online to ancestry.com, familysearch.org, Heritage Quest, footnote.com, Afrogenius, and many other similar sites.
Alex Haley to have access to all this, and he was able to trace back Kunta Kinte, but there's a lot more available now than there ever was before. Just gotta know what's out there, and again, sharing information.
And that's exactly what Jordan plans to do with little Anaya, so that she has the tools to further the research for generations to come.